This video is a guide to establish the discount rates, how they should be assigned against your leases, and when and how often they need to be updated. This video covers the big picture. But if you're after a full deep dive, check out the technical paper in our Knowledge Hub. It's all on our website. Lease discount rates and why it matters. On paper, they might sound like a technical detail, just another input into your lease accounting model. But in practice, the discount rate you choose and how and when you apply it has a direct impact on every lease liability and right-of-use asset on your balance sheet. This walkthrough is for those applying FRS 102, Section 20 or IFRS 16. Whether you are preparing accounts in-house, advising clients or supporting audits, this is the part that often causes confusion, delays or audit challenge. What you need to know. We'll walk through the rate hierarchy, how to derive a supportable discount rate, common traps, options for small and medium-sized businesses, and what best practice really looks like. The discount rate is not something you can plug in later. You need it at lease commencement. It is essential for generating both the lease liability and the right-of-use asset. Under FRS 102, simplifications are available for small and medium-sized businesses, SMEs, on the basis that they may not have the resources readily available to derive a discount rate aligned with the incremental borrowing rate. All of this means you need to establish your discount rate methodology early in the process, not at the reporting stage. Delaying it increases the risk of inconsistent assumptions, rushed decisions, and last-minute corrections. I've seen companies get caught out at year-end because they didn't have the rate agreed or documented, especially when onboarding new leases or transitioning to the new standard. The hierarchy. Let's start with the basics, the order in which you should apply discount rates. Both IFRS 16 and the revised FRS 102 follow the same hierarchy for determining the discount rate. First, try to use the rate implicit in the lease. If that's not available, apply the incremental borrowing rate, or IBR. Under FRS 102, the obtainable borrowing rate, OBR, may be used as a simplification. The rate implicit in the lease. Despite this pecking order, in practice, most lessees are unable to determine the implicit rate. This would require access to both the fair value of the asset and the unguaranteed residual value from the lessor, information that is rarely readily available. Take, for example, an operating vehicle lease. The flat interest rate, or APR, shown on the rental agreement is not the rate implicit in the lease, and it would be incorrect to use it. In such cases, the lessee should apply the IBR or OBR, depending on the applicable standard. IBR and OBR, key differences. So what's the difference between IBR and OBR? The incremental borrowing rate, or IBR, is the rate the lessee would pay to borrow over a similar term with similar security in a similar economic environment. This is required under IFRS 16 and also used under FRS 102 when the implicit rate is not available. Under FRS 102, the obtainable borrowing rate incorporates flexibility to allow a simplified method for small entities. It should still be realistic and based on the lessee's circumstances, but may be determined using proportionate inputs, such as a bank quote. Be mindful, the bank quote should be based on a comparable loan amount and term, reflecting the appropriate security, secured or unsecured, and represent a current supportable rate. In practice, for larger companies, OBR ends up looking very similar to IBR because the same market data and risk profile need to be considered. There's just less room for simplification. Note, the OBR is not permitted under IFRS 16. Building the discount rate and what makes up a discount rate. Let's look at how the discount rate is constructed. There are two main components. First, the base rate. For UK businesses, this is usually the SONIA swap rate that matches the lease term. For example, if you've got a 5-year lease, you'd use the 5-year SONIA swap as your starting point. Then you apply a credit spread. This reflects the lessee's credit risk, whether the lease is secured or unsecured, and the broader cost of borrowing in their sector. The credit spread can be based on recent borrowing terms, indicative quotes from a bank, credit ratings from sources such as CreditSafe or Experian, or internal treasury benchmarks and peer data. For a worked example, for a lease term of 5 years, if the 5-year SONIA swap rate is 4.1% and the unsecured credit spread has been established at 2.15%, this results in a fully supportable IBR of 6.25%. Fallback options for SMEs. For smaller entities where a bank quote isn't available and access to SONIA swap rates may not be practical, a fallback approach is permitted. SMEs can use either a SONIA average or a central bank rate as the base rate, both of which are more accessible, provided the lease is short in term and low in risk. When it comes to estimating the credit spread, there's no expectation that SMEs will access bond yield curves or detailed treasury data. Instead, a simplified approach is acceptable. Small and medium enterprises can use indicative credit spread tables. These are practical guides that align the lessee's credit risk with a reasonable spread, depending on whether the lease is secured or unsecured. For example, if your business has a typical SME risk profile and the lease is unsecured, you might apply a spread of 3.5%. If it's secured and your business has a strong credit history, you might only apply 1.5% or 2%. The key here is that the approach is reasonable, proportionate, and most importantly, documented. In addition, the credit spread can be derived by taking the difference between the interest rate on a recent or current loan and the underlying bank base rate. This difference represents the implied credit spread. You're not expected to over-engineer this, but you are expected to explain how you arrived at the rate. SME example, using a simplified OBR. Now let's say you're working with a small entity that doesn't have recent borrowing activity or a formal credit rating. Under FRS 102, they can apply a simplified approach using SONIA and a standardized credit spread. For example, you've got an unsecured IT lease for 3 years. You could take the 3-year trailing average of SONIA, say 4%, add a credit spread of 3.5% for medium risk, and arrive at an OBR of 7.5%. That's reasonable, proportionate, and fully documented. Exactly what the standard allows for smaller businesses. Base rates and credit spreads. This table shows how the base rates and credit spread can be applied using an indicative credit spread table for small and medium-sized businesses. We hope you find it useful. How to apply or update the rate. Another common mistake is applying a single discount rate across all leases for the year. That's not permitted. The rate must reflect market conditions at the lease commencement date, the date of transition, or at the effective date of a lease modification. You also need to update the rate if you reassess the lease term. For example, if a renewal or break option is exercised or changes in likelihood. Best practice is to review and update your IBR or OBR rates at least quarterly. Avoid applying a single discount rate across different asset classes, for example, property and vehicles, unless you can clearly justify that the portfolio is small, homogeneous, and the approach is proportionate. Similarly, avoid applying one rate across leases with significantly different terms unless it's supported by evidence. If using a blended or weighted average borrowing rate, ensure your assumptions around security and credit spread are documented and reasonable. Reiterating, avoid applying a single discount rate across all leases for the year, and avoid having the one rate for differing lease terms. The table shows how this can be applied in practice. We hope you find it useful. Documentation and audit readiness. Let's be clear, if you can't show how you calculated the rate, it's not audit ready. You need to retain evidence of the base rate used, your credit spread assumptions, any indicative quotes or internal benchmarks, the calculation and final rate selected. Store these alongside your lease files or within your lease accounting system. This is one of the first areas auditors will ask about. Best practice summary. Let's bring it all together with a few key best practice takeaways. Establish your discount rate methodology early in the process, as these rates will be required at the lease commencement date to calculate both the lease liability and the right of use asset. Choose the most suitable method for your business. If you are an SME, you have access to simplified options for establishing the discount rate. Larger businesses, however, have less flexibility and should follow a methodology consistent with the incremental borrowing rate. Apply a credit spread policy that reflects your borrowing profile. This can be based on internal benchmarks, recent borrowing activity, or simplified credit banding for SMEs. But it needs to be consistent and supportable. Don't apply one rate across all leases unless your portfolio is very small and homogeneous. Even then, you need a rationale to support that decision. Update your rates at least quarterly and always at the point of a lease modification or reassessment. A static annual rate is no longer fit for purpose. Finally, build a clear audit trail. That includes your base rate source, spread methodology, calculations, and approval process. Whether you are using software or spreadsheets, these practices are what give the numbers credibility and avoid problems later when the auditors ask how you got there. Common pitfalls. Here are some traps to avoid. Using a flat APR or finance rate from a lease agreement and assuming it's the implicit rate, it's not. Applying a central bank rate by default, acceptable only for short-term, low-risk leases under FRS 102. Using the same discount rate across all lease terms or asset classes, this ignores risk and duration. Failing to update the rate for modifications or reassessments, which leads to misstatements. To wrap up, the discount rate isn't a footnote. It's a fundamental input that affects your balance sheet and your credibility. Establish your methodology early. Use observable data where possible. Keep your assumptions realistic and proportionate. And most importantly, document everything. If you're planning your transition to the new FRS 102 standard, make establishing the discount rate a key part of your project management and visit the Knowledge Hub on our website for our technical paper if you need help scoping it out, and for real-world tips and more. Click like if you found this helpful, comment with your thoughts or questions, and share with friends or colleagues who may be navigating the same challenges. And don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more insightful content, helping you get it right with confidence. Thanks for watching.